Mizzou football appears to be underestimated once again, and guess what? You and I are about to take advantage of it.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hail you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And once again, we're going to talk a lot about Mizzou football on the show. Tiers, rankings, expectations, and how I think we can take advantage really quickly here at the top of the show. Missouri, we can take advantage of this underestimation, in my humble opinion. Also, quickly, I want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And, I love to start with the fun stuff, of course, but you know what? Some serious news here about one of, if not the greatest Missouri athlete of all time. It's Ben Askren, former wrestler, of course, at Mizzou, an MMA fighter, UFC fighter as well. Well, unfortunately, Ben Askren developed a staph infection and also a very serious bout of pneumonia recently that has had him hospitalized, first in the state of Nevada and now more recently in Wisconsin, his home state, where he was transported there. Askren, until just very recently, had been unresponsive, but just, I believe, in the last few hours or so, his wife reported that Askren has been at least able to open his eyes, squeeze people's hands, that type of thing. But obviously, he's not out of the woods yet whatsoever here. He needs a lung transplant, reportedly. That's likely to happen here. So keep one of, again, if not maybe the greatest athlete in Mizzou history of all time, keep him in your thoughts and prayers, because this is a very, very serious situation. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out at the top of the program here. But obviously you come here for the fun stuff, and that's what we're going to get here too on Locked On Mizzou. And I really think that Missouri, if you're a Missouri fan and you're looking for, lowered expectations in the SEC, I think you can take advantage of it here. In fact, let's pull up. This is a graphic that was shared to me, I believe, by my colleague Chris Marler over at Locked On Gamecocks. I could have that one wrong, but I believe this is Chris's graphic here. Regardless, what you have here is your preseason SEC win totals here over at FanDuel Sportsbook. And I think this is a interesting exercise and a very good visual piece of information here for those of you on YouTube. And as you can see here, there's some pretty obvious tiers here in the SEC. Texas, Alabama, Georgia, all 9.5. So in other words, bet the under 9.5 if you think Georgia, Alabama, or Texas is going to win fewer than 9.5 games, and do the opposite, bet the over if you think either one of those teams is going to win more games. The point here, I would say the main point here, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, that's a pretty good top tier. I don't have a lot of qualms with it. In your second tier at 8.5, LSU, Ole Miss, and Tennessee, I don't have a big problem with that tier whatsoever either. You've got teams that either have made the college football playoff or are right on the cusp, I would say. And then it gets really interesting and sort of makes my point. There are 4 teams at 7.5, including Missouri and a bunch of their opponents this season: Auburn, South Carolina, and Texas A&M at 7.5 wins. Also, I'm going to point out here that at last check, FanDuel Sportsbook, this graphic has Florida and Oklahoma at 6.5. I believe the Gators are also at 7.5 right now. So I think as far as putting Missouri into that tier of teams, I think that's about accurate, to be honest with you. But when it comes to Missouri's schedule, well, certainly Missouri's schedule is not equal to Florida's, certainly. And so for Florida to be at 7.5, that just doesn't have much to do with anything other than, DJ Lagway, the Florida quarterback, is a more known quantity or a more known player than Beau Pribula is at this point. There's no doubt about that. And yet, If Florida starts off the season 0-2, for example, the calls for Billy Napier's job are going to get really, really loud. And I say 0-2, I don't know, maybe Florida plays Murray State to start the very first game of the season. The point here is that the Gators and Billy Napier are under a lot more pressure simply because of that schedule. And Missouri, well, as everybody's going to keep pointing out all offseason to the annoyance of some Missouri fans, is that the Tigers have about as navigable of an SEC schedule as you're going to imagine. Doesn't mean it's easy, but relatively speaking, a navigable schedule. To me, at 7.5, Missouri, that's about, I think 7 wins is a very realistic expectation for Missouri this season. I think 8 wins is a pretty solid expectation. If you listen to Eli Drinkwitz, he thinks they can get 10 and get into the college football playoff. Now, could that be coach speak? Could that be some psychology on Drinkwitz's part? Without a doubt. But at the same time, I don't think it's impossible. You look at some objective measures like ESPN's FPI to just take one. Well, the Tigers are 23rd in the country. That doesn't tell you that Missouri is expected to be an elite unit, but the difference between 23 and, say, 16, or more importantly, probably 11 or 12 for this upcoming season in terms of the playoff, I just don't think there's a real wide gulf, not as much as there is between, say, the 23rd best team in the country and Ohio State last season, especially how the Buckeyes played toward the end of the year. So to me, it's not only about the number itself, but the odds. I think plus 104. So in other words, you're getting a little bit of extra juice there to bet, as opposed to the opposite. You have to bet no and give up quite a bit. To me, a yes on the over, that's a solid bet. Plus 104, you bet $100, you win 104, as opposed to having to give up a little bit of an edge to win. I think that's a good bet. I really, if you put Missouri at 8.5, I would have thought, okay, that's too high. I think that is too high with the questions that Missouri has. I think that's fair enough. So really the number should be 8, in my opinion, but for whatever reason, it seems like FanDuel Sportsbook and the rest of the industry isn't really into whole numbers when it comes to setting their preseason over-unders. They either want winners or losers. So in my opinion, 8 should really be the number for Missouri. Not only are you getting a half of a win, but at plus 104, that's a pretty good value to me. I'm not saying you go crazy on it and bet the farm on it per se, but yeah, put a couple units on it, and I think you're going to get some value. These days, that's about as much as you can expect. And coming up on the program, who I may have dissed for Mizzou. Who is the big snub, the big omission from my top 6? Was it top 5 or top 6? I think I put top 5 out on social media. But yes, I did top 6 for my particular podcast segment. Who was the biggest snub? Let's talk about that here in a minute. First, though, let's talk about my friends at Game Time, where, of course, there's really nothing like the NBA playoffs. Have you ever attended an NBA playoff game in person? I promise you it's worth it, especially the NBA Finals. My goodness, this Oklahoma City Indiana series has been amazing. It really has been. If you happen to be somebody who wants to attend Game 6 in Indiana, well, with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer here on the secondary market. I love that I can see my exact view before I buy. So again, no surprises whatsoever. Let's take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So I had a lot of people weigh in, especially when I put it out there on social media, who the top 6 Tigers are in this coming roster. And why top 6, by the way? Well, quite simply, That's what Locked On asked me to do, and everybody on the network was asked to pick the top 6 from their market, from their team, and, well, pretty soon we're all going to be voting on it. We're going to have a big Locked On top 100 reveal here nationally in the coming weeks, so that's going to be a lot of fun and some good fodder for all of you out there. And speaking of fodder, well, I got to say, my listeners, once again, are incredibly intelligent human beings because, in my opinion, you all had basically the same honorable mentions as I did, or at least you had some people on there that on your top 6 that didn't quite make mine, but almost without fail, the ones that were picked, well, they were the ones that I had 7, 8, 9, that type of deal. So once again, here was my top 5 here. I didn't have room for 6. I won't get into the vagaries of my graphic creation at this point, but only the top 5 here is going to be on the screen. Chris McClellan on the interior defensive line, Dalen Carnell at the star position, Kevin Coleman, the new receiver in the slot for Missouri, Ahmad Hardy, the new Missouri running back, and also Damon Wilson from Georgia, the edge rusher. At number 6, well, Zion Young, another returner, another edge rusher as well. So half the guys were newcomers, half of them were on the team last season. And it came to the most often mentioned guys, once again, who didn't make my list. Well, Caden Green was probably number 1, and he was definitely my number 1 or perhaps number 2, I would say, along with Connor Tollison on the offensive line, both on the interior part of the Missouri defensive line. You know, Caden Green, a guy who has gotten some love from NFL scouts. I've been paying attention here the last few weeks. He's a bona fide prospect here. Some even saying he's a little bit like Armand Mimbu in that he is a really good guard, but could maybe kick out and play left tackle with his measurables and his footwork too. So again, a legit NFL prospect here is Caden Green. I have to admit, one reason he didn't make my top 6 is because of that position. Were he Missouri's left tackle, I think he probably would have made my top 6, but just based on positional value, I'm going to tend to take a couple pass rushers like I did over an interior offensive lineman. That's not to say that guards aren't important. Of course guards are important. Centers are incredibly important as well. I just don't think they're quite as important as the tackles. Maybe reasonable people can disagree with that particular take. But I saw a lot of other people with Tristan Newson, the Missouri linebacker. Hey, some believers in Bo Prabula already out there. I'm definitely among them. I just wasn't willing to go quite that far to put Prabula in the top 6 with not only the fact that he hasn't started a game for Missouri yet, but most importantly, just doesn't have a lot of experience in college football yet. The good news is what little I've seen from Prabula, I find to be very encouraging. So that's definitely a good thing, and it'll be a good thing if he's in the top 6 by the end of the season. That means Missouri's probably had a really good football season, I would imagine, if that happens. Jalen Catalon was mentioned quite a bit, a talented but occasionally injured player, and by the way, well-traveled as well. I have to say I was surprised that nobody brought up Josiah Trotter, the linebacker, son of Jeremiah Trotter from West Virginia. I think he's just going to be one of those classic Missouri linebackers that ends up making just a ton of tackles this season. Set the over-under at 110 tackles for Josiah Trotter and maybe bang the over as well, in my opinion. So again, I'll throw it up there. There's my top 5 once again, but the guys who were most mentioned that didn't make the list, Caden Green probably number 1, Connor Tollison also for sure. Tollison with some injury questions this season, but I think we're hoping he'll be okay by this fall anyway. But yeah, Jalen Catalon, and yes, if Bo Prabula, if he makes it into the top 5 or 6 by the end of the year, that means Mizzou very well might be a college football playoff team. And transitioning to Mizzou basketball here for a little bit, when it was announced that the Tigers were playing at Howard this season, I initially thought, DC, that could be a fun possible road/plane trip. But you know what? Playing in Howard's rather tiny gym, that may be a tough ticket number one. So the fact that the Tigers are playing at Notre Dame this season in basketball in the ACC SEC Challenge, well, heck, that's definitely drivable. That's what, about 5 hours, something like that, up to South Bend. That seems like a pretty interesting potential trip, and a unique one as well. I would like to see more of this as a Missouri fan, as just a college basketball fan in general, just to see these types of inter-conference battles that actually take place on campus. By the way, that seems to be a more rare treat. So, especially outside of these type of challenge games. So, I guess it's nice for Missouri to actually be in one of these challenge games for a change, because very often, well, Missouri has been either left out of it and often not given the most desirable matchups because, well, quite honestly, the Tigers haven't been all that good the last decade or so. So, nice to see an interesting one between Mizzou and Notre Dame. I know there's obviously a lot of people in this area, including some friends I have who are Notre Dame people, Notre Dame graduates, all that good stuff. So maybe start trying to figure out some lodging in South Bend now. Now, when it comes to all the changes in college football recently, not only going back, obviously, to the free transfer portal era, NIL, now we're transferring into the revenue sharing era, if you want to put it that way. Well, I've been mostly focused, and even on when it comes to a potential breaking off the SEC, the Big Ten, maybe getting away from the NCAA. Well, mostly I've focused on this program on what it means for Missouri, because quite simply, this is a Missouri program. But if you're going to ask me another question, not simply is this going to be good or bad for Missouri and their competitiveness in the future, the eyeballs on the program. If you're asking if I like any of this, well, the answer is not really. I got to be honest. In particular, I think the point that the SEC is going for semifinals right now. For example, yes, I think that would probably, all things being equal, give Missouri a better chance at the college football playoff in a lot of seasons. But even if that's true, and I'm not 100% sure that it is, why does it seem like college football's goal right now? I mean, really, it seems like the entire goal, if I didn't know any better, was to water down what was the greatest regular season in all of American sports. And instead, we're trading that in for the college football playoff. And the dollars and cents are maybe hard to argue with in the short term. But once again, what I worry about in this sport, and to some degree pro sports, but especially college sports right now, is that there is the chase for the short-term dollar at the expense of the health of the sport long-term. And I'm not trying to be Pollyannish here. I'm making the case that actually you're hurting your profitability long-term for the chase of a short-term dollar. That would be my concern with all of this. But again, if you're going to ask me, is any of this hurting Missouri? Well, the history of college football has been that Missouri is not exactly in the catbird seat, has become my recent catchphrase. No, in fact, it's been programs like Nebraska and Oklahoma and Alabama, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is the likelihood greater that Missouri would have become one of those type of programs under the old system? Or is it more likely that the Tigers are able to rise up in a new system as long as you're in the big leagues, basically, and Missouri's going to be, as far as I can tell? That was what happened when Missouri joined the SEC. Then I think what you're looking at over the long haul is more parity. And more parity means, all things being equal, more wins for the Tigers. So as a college football fan, well, generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of this, being the traditionalist that I am. I know I'm not going to stop watching, especially if the Tigers are winning. And speaking of revenue sharing, how much revenue should be shared with the non-revenue sports? Well, the brutally honest answer is probably none. But I'm going to make the steel man case for some of those sports right after these quick words. So clearly Missouri, like most, if not all, of major college sports, are going to be putting the lion's share of their revenue share money into football, into paying football players, essentially. Well, a decent amount of that is going to go to Missouri men's basketball as well, but what about the other sports? Again, I'm going to make the argument for it whether I actually believe it or not. That's what's called a steel man, folks. So for women's basketball, I've already made this point before for some of you everydayers out there. But I'll say this for women's basketball. Number one, how much do you really need to spend on the facility side? Well, basically nothing. You've already got Mizzou Arena, which is a great facility for Missouri women's basketball, and the practice facilities, the weight rooms, and everything that goes with it. No reason that the women obviously can't have, and I'm sure they do have the exact same access to all that stuff as the men do. And by the way, even more importantly, I thought the Caitlin Clark's return this past Sunday, I watched quite a bit of that game. I could not believe that game got a 20 on ABC, a 20 rating. If you know anything about ratings, that's stunningly high. And the fact that's orders of magnitude higher, I believe, than any of the NBA Finals games so far. So, yeah, a lot of that is just Caitlin herself being an enormous star. But sort of like Tiger Woods, you got to wonder if she can just bring the whole sport up with her to some extent. So women's basketball is certainly a sport on the rise, and Caitlin Clark may be just one of the first of maybe some more stars in that sport coming. You never know what's going to happen there, but just her gravitational pull alone, I think, makes a pretty compelling argument for at least trying in women's basketball. Now, I think you can make an even better argument, though, actually, for women's gymnastics, a sport that just finished third in the entire country this past season. And Hearn Center strikes me as a pretty solid facility for a gymnastics program. Again, another, I think, SEC gymnastics in general, not the same obviously there's no star to the level of Caitlin Clark, but another sport that I think is on the rise, is a compelling, again, Friday Night Heights. I've said it a million times. I think it's a great television product. And Missouri has an excellent coach, an excellent program. And you know what? According to Eli Hoff's numbers that I was reading this morning over at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Missouri spent approximately 0.3% of its budget on gymnastics last season. That was, fifth or sixth in the pecking order, well behind, obviously, the basketball programs. But, the thing is, all you have to do, I shouldn't say all you have to do, but you go from 0.3% to 0.5%, that may actually make a huge difference in Missouri gymnastics. It may actually give you a shot at a national championship. If not next year, because Missouri's obviously replacing an incredible senior class there of gymnasts, but you never know. I just think with the coach that they have, with Shannon Walker in place, I mean, anything's possible there. Softball, heck, you got a beautiful venue. And as we saw this past season with Texas Tech, the national runners-up, all you really need is you're one pitcher away, basically. If you're in the Big 12, if you're in the SEC, if you're in that level of softball, which certainly Missouri is, you're basically one pitcher away from competing for a national championship. Now, as far as the men's side on the diamond, baseball, well, the argument there is pretty simple. You're a former national champion. Not a lot of other sports in Missouri history can make that claim. And this is the best baseball in college. If anything, if you're, as I've assumed here, hey, Missouri's in the SEC, is in the big leagues here for the long run. Well, if you want to make sure that that's the case, make sure that you're not historically awful at a sport that the rest of the SEC seems to care about every season. So to me, that's the argument for baseball. The problem is, unlike women's basketball, unlike gymnastics, certainly softball, it seems like facility-wise, the Missouri is so far behind the rest of the league. Just the dollars and cents there doesn't make a ton of sense. But again, what if there's no real option there? I think that's the case as much as anything for baseball. And then, of course, hey, wrestling, volleyball, a lot of what I said about gymnastics holds true there. It's just that gymnastics is sort of, well, the shiny, bright new object right now. It's not as though wrestling hasn't had tremendous success under Brian Smith. In fact, you're seeing an attempt right now at professional amateur freestyle wrestling. There's now a league being started by, I believe, Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff from wrestling fame. Who knows how that's going to go? But again, you never know where these sports could go in the future. Lots of sports have ebbed and flow in terms of popularity over the years. And, volleyball, again, a lot of the same type of elements that make gymnastics interesting. Volleyball, same thing. It's great action. Both sports, I think, really impressive stuff, sports that people get into, especially gymnastics. Again, this is more to that argument. But every 4 years, people get into those sports in a pretty serious way. Again, especially women's gymnastics. So those are the takes there, I think. Those are the arguments for putting money into those programs. If I'm in the Missouri gymnastics program, I'm certainly going, hey, look at what we got. Look at what your bang for your buck last year. We're not asking for that much more, but if you can just double our output, our outlay, you're talking about a rounding error for the football program, but for us, this could be an absolutely huge deal. Now, again, I'm not sure how much of this I actually believe because, hey, I'm a Missouri football and basketball fan, first and foremost. I'm not saying that I don't want the other sports to win because I do like it when they win. I certainly want them to try. But actually spending money, spending the $20.5 million that is going to be available there, that is a concrete number that is etched in stone for this season. That's the issue for me. That's the question. It's not about, oh, screw Missouri baseball or any of these other sports. It's just, there's an opportunity cost there, and a very serious one, especially considering Missouri's obviously all in on football right now. So, hey, thanks for being all in with me on the program today. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. And for your second listen, check out the portal with Brian Smith for all of your news and rumors and signings regarding the portal and everything else college football. Find the portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So until next time, I'm John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.